Okay. Okay. See, before going to data engineering topic, right? Daily, some are the other time, right? We will watch Netflix series, right? And also Swiggy, we order here and there, right? A daily basis, or weekly twice or thrice we will order. Anytime have you observed, as soon as we open the Netflix, right, we will get the suggestions, right? How it is coming to know what are our interest, right? For example, I watched one movie, like let's say some 30 minutes I watched, and I just came out of Netflix due to my work. Next day, as soon as I open Netflix, right, it will show that movie first, and also it will show what were the related movies, right? So for example, if I watch Telugu movies, right, aligned whatever the related movies, it will suggest, not all the movies. Even Swiggy also like that, right? Say for example, today I had biryani, so tomorrow, right, I ordered biryani tomorrow. So not only tomorrow, immediately I can say, if you open the Swiggy, it will show whatever the restaurants, right, sell the biryani, right? It will show all the suggestions. Even in Blinkit also like that only, right? Whatever the items, right, you liked or you just watched. Even Mintra, Amazon, if you observe, right, if you just add the item to cart, that is enough, right? So next time onwards, it will show whatever the related. And not only that, Insta feed, right? Insta level, like whatever the we watch that shorts, right? That serial, this one, right? Reels. So that one also related one only. For example, if you are watching one political party thing, right? Related one only it will come. Right? It won't even show other thing. How it is happening? Have you any time think about it? So why it is suggesting whatever is interesting to me? Not only you, right? You are the one using Netflix. Not like that, right? Millions of users are using this Netflix, Swiggy, or Insta Reels. Every millions of people are using. But for each person, it is able to deliver the things, right? Show the whatever the suggested things clearly, right? So, and also if you observe before COVID and after COVID, before COVID, we used to go to shops for small, small things. But after COVID, what happened? Majority of the people are leaning to the online shopping only. Right? Because we are used to that. That 1.5 year we used to online shopping, right? Whatever the groceries are clothes, whatever it may be, right? We are lean onto that online shopping. So that's why also majority of the companies are getting huge data. Right, majority of the companies are getting huge data. If you observe, Swiggy is not this much earlier, right? Before COVID, it is not this much. But now, if you observe everywhere, on road, right, compared to normal vehicles, their vehicles are more, right? Swiggy, Insta, even normal Mintra, everybody, right? If you see on road also, that whatever the delivery vehicles, right, big containers. Here and there they are moving for all the online thing only. But prior to COVID, it was not like this. That's where if you observe data engineering jobs, right, now you will get the idea, right, why data engineering came into boom now only. Even though data engineering is there since 10 years, right, but nobody discussed about this data engineering earlier. Now only people are so many companies are hiring for data engineering employees, right? Why? Because majority of the people, not only fact, right? If you see earlier, we used to keep cash, but now everything became online, right? Whatever the phone pay, Google pay, everything we are using, right? Compared to earlier, because that time we should not go out. We should, so that's where this resolution came out, right? This revolution came out. So that's where all the companies, either banking or marketing or this whatever the Flipkart, Amazon, all these people are getting huge number of data, right? Huge data they are getting. But simply, right, if I just watched that whatever the movie, right, simply they can't take that information and keep, right? Behind the scenes, some mechanism should be there to collect the data. I accepted. So to collect this data, right? And simply collecting is not sufficient, right? It should be like, processed properly, right? And it should be available for the business people to see like, how the things are going. See, for example, today for delivery, it took like, 30 minutes, right? See, earlier, if you see like, for whatever the like, Domino's pizza and all, they used to like, keep in Bangalore, like within 30 minutes, if we deliver, after that, right, if you are not able to deliver within 30 minutes, right, I'll give you free, right? If you observe, like, 10 years back, like, this was the Panda. But later, right, why they moved to like, normal? Because they analyze this area, like, whatever the traffic, they are able to analyze it, right? So that means, right, they are collecting this data, right? How the deliveries are happening, how much traffic is there, why it is taking time, everything, right, to the business people. Somebody is giving behind the scenes, somebody is giving the data to the business people to take the decisions, right? To take the decisions. Based on that only now, there is no rule like that, right? It may take 1 hour, it may take 30 minutes, it may take like 45 minutes. They are not guaranteeing. Based on what? Based on this data analysis, right? Not only this, if you just observe IPL matches, earlier IPL matches were not this much, right? But now IPL matches people are watching, and also in IPL matches, if you observe, right, whatever the like, player details and all. See, earlier player is like good player, it's okay, but they are not like, showing whatever the like, his track record, everything, right, within seconds, how many Ranji trophies he played, everything they are able to show that data very quickly, I say, right? How it is coming, right? Something is happening behind the scenes. That behind the scene is data engineering. So each and every, see, for each task is generating number of events. That means, right, if for example, I ordered the Swiggy, so order placed, right, how many items he placed. So these items, how many items he placed, that item should be there in the inventory. If item is there in inventory, after like, we place the successful order means we need to reduce that event, whatever the inventory, what size, right? For example, I ordered 10 items. So they should reduce, for example, they are having 90 items, means they should reduce to 80, right? So that means each and every event they need to keep track, right? Each and every event. See, for example, they delivered, they are on track, right? They are on the way, everything, right? So each and every event they are keep tracking. If you do later, there may be chances of missing the data. So this data, we will call it a stream of data, right? Stream of events. This total event data, they are able to collect and process, right? They are able to collect and process, store and process, and just make this data available for reports, insights, we will call, right? For the business people, analysis. All these things will be done by data engineering fellow, right? So that's where now Databricks, Snowflake came into boom. But Databricks, even Snowflake is there since like 10 years, but now since 5 years only, it is into market. But even Databricks also like that. Earlier also it was there, AWS Databricks, even Azure Databricks was there, but earlier. But now people are using more, all banking people, right? Even like, Flipkart, Amazon, all these people also using. Okay, now let us like, see one by one how like, things are going one by one. See, all these things I explained, right? How Amazon is suggesting, all these things we discussed, Amazon Prime or Netflix, whatever it may be, behind the scenes, answer is data engineering. Right? How it is doing is like, data engineering job. Right? So then if you observe now all the companies, right? All the like, for all the companies, data explosion is more. Right? The data is more. Right? Even Flipkart, Amazon, Netflix, even Blinkit, right? For everybody, Jepto, everybody data is like, very huge in millions. Right? Per day, millions of data. See, if you see like, now we will get it out. Earlier, SSRS reports, SSIS package, all these things are there. All those are also like, ETL jobs only. Why they were using SSIS packages and all to do ETL jobs. What is ETL? Extract, transform, and load, right? So that means from some source, right? We are extracting the data. Then transform means whatever the raw data is there, that data we will transform, right? And that then we will load into some other database for the reporting purpose or insights purpose, right? So even earlier also these things were there, but those are like traditional kind of normal, right? That time this much data was not there. So that's why normal ETL tools were sufficient. Right? For almost all the databases is having this ETL mechanism, SQL Server, Oracle, everywhere this ETL mechanism was there. But for this huge data, for now we are getting billions of records, right? Per day we are getting. So this much data normally using traditional ETL processing, we can't do. It's not possible. They may crash, right? Say, for example, now, right, whatever the Amazon data or Netflix data, we can't store in normal SQL or Oracle, which is not possible, right? It is very huge amount of data, right? It's not possible. That's where this data lakes, right, all these things came into picture. Okay, so finally, now, for example, I'm a data engineer, right? So what kind of responsibilities will be there, right? Because you are going to join as a data engineer after this course, right? So what kind of work will be having? What kind of work? See, first thing is there will be some raw data, right? Either it will be some source, right? Some source will be there. So either it will be like a CSV file or some other API, right? Or some other source, from some other source we are getting data, like either it will be database or APIs or some CSV files or PowerPoint file, whatever the form, some raw data is there. That data, what we need to do, we need to collect first, right? We need to, so that means collect means read that data, right? As a raw, just read it, store that information somewhere, right? So we see, for example, daily if you go to bank, right, for Aadhaar change or like whatever it may be, what they will do, they just keep the data in some Excel sheet. They don't directly update in the application. So that's why what they will do, what they will say, 24 hours it will take to process your Aadhaar update or whatever it may be. Why they are not able to update immediately? Because not only you, right, they'll get daily some number of people, right? They don't be doing on the spot. So what they will do, they'll keep everything in some Excel and they'll keep that data somewhere. So what these people behind the scenes, these software people, what they are going to do, they'll collect that data, they'll keep in some location. From there, right, for example, either it will be S3 or ADLS, right? Somewhere Azure data lake storage, right? Somewhere they will keep. From there, what data engineering people are going to do? So first they'll collect, store in S3 or ADLS. From there, read it, transform it. What is transformation means? As per application requirement or as per end user, either it will be business people or some other, right? So they will change the process the data properly, right? That processing we won't do normally. So they will do, they'll create the pipelines, automation we have to do, right? It won't be daily basis we are going to read, execute one job. See, earlier how it was, they used to do daily jobs running, right? I think you might have heard supporting people, generally they will do. What they will do, daily morning one job, it will be running. If it is throwing any errors, just collect that errors and send an email or see either it is success or failure, such kind of job support people will do, right? So, but now that job is not sufficient because hourly basis also we are getting more number of records. See, if you see normal bank people under that job kind of is fine. But if you see Swiggy, Instamart, all these things, right? Blinkit, for all these things, the job is not sufficient, right? Daily once or twice running job is not sufficient because each and every minute they are getting huge data. So that's why what they will do, continuous reading they have to do. For that, they will create the pipelines. So automatically what it will do, it should read the CSV file, right? Process, then store that data in respective databases for the reporting or insighting purpose. Right? That's where data engineering person will come into picture. So what is your responsibilities? You need to look into multiple sources of data, and then you need to write the SQL queries to transform that data, or Python logic or PySpark logic you need to do, right? And you need to work on the pipelines. Some things, right, they may keep you in pipeline development also, right? Pipeline development or just monitoring also they will keep, right? So what is your end goal? So you should learn the Python basics, you should learn the SQL properly, right? Either it will be with Databricks or like Snowflake. You should learn the SQL querying properly, thoroughly. Then what else you need to learn? Transformation, right? Either it will be using PySpark or DBT, right? This you need to learn. Then, right, whatever the pipeline automation also we should do. All these things we are going to learn as part of this course, right? So, as I said, what is the data engineering architecture? So, this data sources may be either it will be CSV file or Parquet file or any other API. Then that data will keep in the ADLS, or so this is Azure one, this is Amazon one. S3 means Amazon S3, right? Databricks or Snowflake we will use to process that data, right? So then whatever the transformations we will do, once the transformations done means, right, we'll store that actual data, right, for the available for the either Power BI or Tableau they can use to create the reports. Same data we can use for AI also, right? So AI also doing same thing, right? What it will do, it just reads the data from the models, right? That's why it is working, right? So behind the scenes somebody is there to prepare the models, right? That's where data engineering people will be there. Okay, so then, so what is ADLS RS3? Here it is cheaper compared to Snowflake or any structured database. Compared to structured databases, ADLS RS3 is cheaper because, right, it is just you are dumping the data, so they are not going to maintain proper structured data. So that's why it is cheaper compared to that. Okay, and you can store any kind of data, either it will be structured or unstructured, anything you can store. Generally majority of the people are using either ADLS or S3, right? So for data engineering person, daily they will work with these things, right? Either S3 or ADLS will to read the files, right? We will use these sources. Okay, then what is Databricks, right? What is Databricks? So in Databricks I can store, right, either file information directly if I want to store Excel file, or normal data or image or CSV data. Normal data in the sense rows and columns also I can store, or any files also I can dump. So that means Databricks I can keep any kind of data. Okay, so here mainly, right, what is Databricks? It is a processing tool kind of, right? So here we are going to process using Databricks. We can process the data using PySpark. We can create the PySpark jobs right here to process the data, right? Whatever the data we stored, either it is structured or unstructured, right? We can create Python notebooks, right? We can we can do the jobs, continuous pipelines, everything we can do with the Databricks. But what is Snowflake? What is the difference between Snowflake and Databricks? Snowflake is kind of warehouse. Okay, Snowflake is kind of warehouse where we can store the data. What is Databricks? It is kind of factory where we are going to create the items, kind of, right? For example, like sofas under manufacturing kind of, right? Databricks is kind of manufacturing, whereas Snowflake is kind of warehouse, that we are going to store it kind of. So for storage purpose, we use Snowflake, right? But here we can use DBT, all these things to do transformations. But whereas in the Databricks, right, it is kind of PySpark, all these things are inbuilt, right? Because on top of PySpark only Databricks is built, right? So that's why everything is readily available with the Databricks. So that's why teams, right, based on their requirement, they will decide whether I'll go with the Databricks or Snowflake. See, for example, my requirement is simple, right? Just read the CSV data, or like, any kind of source from some source, I'm reading the data and storing, right? Doing like, little bit, not like, huge processing is not there. With a minimal processing, I'm going to store in the Snowflake. So that, any database I need to store. So that time I'll go with Snowflake. But my requirement is not like that. I have to do like, lot of processing in between, right? Then I'll go with Databricks. Lot of like, business rules are there. I need to apply, right? For example, either it is legal or like, any banking kind of things, right? Where we are going to apply different rules, different business transformations we have to do in between. Then I'll go with the Databricks. Understood? So when people, based on business requirement, people will choose either Databricks or Snowflake, right? Okay. So, but compared to like, traditional databases, why people are choosing Snowflake? Right. So what I said, Snowflake is a warehouse kind of, where I can store structured data. If I want unstructured data also, I can keep in stages. But generally, we'll store structured data. Then what is the advantage of Snowflake over normal traditional databases like SQL or like, Oracle, right? Or like normal other databases are there, right? MySQL, all these things. Compared to that, what is the advantage of this? For example, my requirement is like, this season, let's say December season, I'm having more, I'll get more data. Let's say Amazon is there December season, because they'll keep offers and all. So they'll get more requests, right? So more orders they will get. So that means application will get more requests, right? So that whatever the database, right, should work very quickly. So that's why what they did, they increased the size of the SQL server. So because normal traditional databases also, we can increase the server capacity, right? Server capacity, and we can execute, we can keep it ready for the business requirement. But what happened? Anytime server, right? How we can buy for 1 year, right? Like that only, right? Not for each month we cannot change it. Why? Because it is a physical arrangement, right? So we bought it for our business purpose, right? For example, after January, our offers are done. Now people are not buying that many items. So that means, right, my request got reduced. So simply I'm paying money for that. Right? How much I am using, that much I am not paying. Even though I'm not using, right? Still I'm paying money for that. But Snowflake is not like that. For example, it will, based on the requirement, your requirement, right? It can scale up or scale down. It can scale up or scale down. Automatic scale up and scale down is possible with the Snowflake. So that means how much you are going to use. For that much only, you are going to pay. So that's where it will be like cheaper compared to traditional databases. And also like for huge data, traditional databases are not like suggested. So because it can't bear up that much capacity. And also main advantage with the Snowflake is in traditional databases, computing. Computing means execution of the query, storing of the query, both will be there in the same processor. So that's where if you were like, queries, like, if your requests are increased, so that means, right, your server will be slowed down. But whereas in Snowflake, computing layer will be separate, storage layer will be separate. So that's why it won't affect whatever how much data you wanted to store it. Increase the size of your storage layer and keep your data. but a compute layer will be like same, right? It won't like, if I want more requests, it will increase. Otherwise, it will be like, normal size only. So both the layers are different. And also it is like, for unlike SQL Server, it is not physical thing, right? It will be maintained by somebody else. Companies don't want to think about that, how much storage, how much, all these things I don't want to worry. So based on, for example, I need for these many accounts, right? These many users. Okay. And this is the role for that. And this is what I'm going to store. So how many tables I'm going to create, or like, how much data I'm going to keep, for that only I'm going to pay. So I no need to, companies are no need to like, worry about the structure of physical structure, all these things we no need to worry. It will be maintained by Snowflake. Right. So that's where the advantage of Snowflake comes in, like with the traditional databases. Okay. So Databricks, as I said, Databricks is a processing engine, whereas Snowflake is a warehouse. Okay. And mainly, right, Snowflake is like, for especially with SQL we use. But whereas in Databricks, I can keep either Python jobs or like, SQL querying also we can do. Even ETL, everything is inbuilt kind of with Databricks. Whereas with Snowflake, right, we'll use along with other tools. Okay. Mainly Snowflake purpose is what? It is a warehouse where we are going to store and write some processing queries, SQL queries. For that purpose, generally we use processing we will do. That's what, using queries, right? But whereas here we will do jobs. Transformation also we can do. Here DBT is there, right? That's what, using DBT we can do in Snowflake, right? We can do transformations using DBT. Okay. And also we can use like, Snowpark, all these things also we can use. Even PySpark also possible with Snowflake. But it is not kind of inbuilt. Okay. We can do all these things, but people won't prefer like that. Okay. If my requirement is like, doing with the jobs and all, PySpark jobs and all, I'll go with the Databricks. I don't want to go with Snowflake. See, if my requirement is doing more jobs, right, more transformations with the PySpark, then I'll go with the Databricks. Okay, I won't go with Snowflake. See, Snowflake is mainly for SQL transformations kind of. So where I'm going to store structured data, and that structured data I'm going to process as per my requirement using SQL queries kind of. Right, I have written a lot of big SQL queries, and I process like either it will be views or procedures. I can do everything in Snowflake, right? And bit transformations are there, which I can do using DBT transformation, right? So that we can do in Snowflake. But my requirement is not like that. My requirement is like, structured and unstructured data, both I'm going to get, right? And that data I'm going to process like in different ways using Python, PySpark jobs, right? Then like, for example, legal data, or like, any, for example, banking data, such kind of scenarios, right? Where I'm going to apply a lot of rules, right? A lot of business rules will be there. In that scenario, I'll go with the Databricks. I don't go with Snowflake, because here my requirement is not only storage, right? In the Databricks scenario, not only storage, I need to do lot of processing, lot of other stuff I have to take care.
For example, we take any structure. Most of the times we are getting the structured data from a different online platform.
Yeah.
CPA or some.
Yes, yes.
Some online once we take the unstructured data, where the what is the step?
See, here we will keep in the Snowflake, we will see, for example, that whatever the event data we can read using Kafka, and we can keep in the stage, and that stage data we can keep in the database tables. Okay, that is possible. And the Databricks scenario, that's what in the stage we will keep. Here one option is there in Snowflake, that data we can keep in the stage. From that, we can read and process and we can dump in the tables. There is one option called staging. Okay, in Snowflake. In that staging, I can keep. Within the Snowflake also we can keep. But generally, we won't keep within the Snowflake. Where we will keep? Either AWS S3 we will keep or ADLS we can keep. Okay, generally, directly if you want, right, you can keep in the Snowflake stage also we can keep any file data.
Database also same like a Snowflake, but
Not same like Snowflake. It is not a warehouse. It is a processing tool kind of. So here we have the storage also like Snowflake, but along with that there are already beyond things kind of PySpark built in, PySpark, ETL, everything is built in kind of in the Databricks. Okay, everything is possible with the Databricks. Whereas Snowflake, we have to use other tools. We can integrate other tools. For example, here with the Snowflake, we can integrate the PySpark. Understood? It is a warehouse where if I want, I can integrate the PySpark jobs with this. Right? Either Snowpark or PySpark, we can integrate to do the jobs. Whereas with the Databricks, it is built in. Right? Because the Databricks built on top of Spark. What is Spark? Spark is a data processing engine. Whenever you have like, huge data, right? Step by step, if you process, for example, 100 records or 1 lakh records, you can do step by step. Millions of records, if you do step by step processing, what will happen? It will take a lot of time. And also server may crash. So to avoid that kind of things, Spark comes into picture. What is Spark? It is a distributed processing engine. So instead of doing one by one, right, parallelly it will do. Instead of doing one person, right, 10 persons can do parallelly kind of. It is a distributed processing engine. Spark is a. So Databricks built on top of Spark. Okay, so that's why all these things are like, built-in support. You got my point, right? Clear? So that's where, right, when based on requirement, people will decide. Okay, so you have huge data. That is your target means go with Snowflake. Your requirement is lot of processing, not that I'm not worrying about huge data. Okay, I am worrying about processing. So then I'll go with the Databricks. Okay, so that means, right, different variations of processing is there. So then I'll go with the Databricks. Okay, based on the requirement, people will choose. Okay, so next. So in Databricks, right, what are all topics we are going to cover? See, for example, you want the course with the Databricks, not with the Snowflake. Then all these tools we are going to cover. Okay, so first we'll make you learn Python, SQL, PySpark, right? And then, right, all the Databricks fundamentals we'll teach. Then ADLS S3, right? How it works with the ADLS, especially here, because Databricks, we are going with Azure Databricks. Now, see, Databricks is available with both Azure and AWS. But Databricks, we are going to cover with Azure. Okay, so because majority of the people are using Databricks with Azure, not the AWS. So both will be almost same. If you learn the Azure Databricks, you can work on AWS Databricks also. There won't be like, any issue. But in our institute, we'll learn with Azure Databricks. So that's why how ADLS works with Azure Databricks, how can we access that ADLS data, and we'll learn. Then, right, how the streaming, all these things, right, we can do with the Databricks, all these things we will learn. Then Kafka, Unity Catalog, Databricks Unity Catalog will teach. And this ADF here with the Databricks, we'll learn Azure Data Factory, not the Airflow. Airflow will, right, Airflow will come with the Snowflake, not with the Databricks. Okay, so here we will cover Azure Data Factory, we will cover, because if you are learning Azure Databricks, ADF is compulsory. So that's why we'll teach ADF, then DBT, Git, CI/CD we will teach. Okay, and then this one we already, like, I explained how the data, right? Here we will create mainly pipelines, right? So here we will have medallion architecture, everything we are going to teach along with the Databricks. Okay, along with the Snowflake, what we will teach is SQL, Python as usual for both the things. Then Snowflake fundamentals, how the Snowflake architecture works, and right, what is stage and what kind of file formats Snowflake will accept, and right, then right, whatever the airflows we will teach. Right, here with the Snowflake, we'll teach airflows, DBT, and Snowpark also. Right, like PySpark, here Snowpark is there. Okay, that's a Snow. See, if you know one, right, other one you can adopt very easily. So Git, CI/CD, Terraform will teach. If you want Terraform, right, will teach. Otherwise, it is not required with the Snowflake only simply, right? And RBAC we will teach because Snowflake is like account based, not the environment, right? It is not a server kind of, right? If you create the account, you can just create your database in Snowflake kind of. So RBAC is important. So how the security matters, how the security works in Snowflake, all these things we will teach along with the Snowflake. Role-based access control. Right? Because each user will have one role kind of, either you will okay, so that's all. So any doubt? Any doubt so far? Online people, any doubt? Any doubts? Hello?
Yeah, ma'am.
Any doubts?
No, ma'am, no doubts, ma'am.
Is it clear?
Yes, ma'am, it's clear, ma'am.
Okay. So just let us know, like, which path you are going to choose, either Databricks or Snowflake. Okay. So based on that, you can learn. Okay. So both are available. Okay. So I hope everybody are clear. What is
current ID Snowflake?
uh-huh.
What is the current ID requirement?
IT requirement, I can say like even Databricks also people are using. I can say comparatively, right? A Snowflake, Databricks will be more compared to Snowflake. I can say, like for example, 60% of the people are using Databricks, so 40% will be like into Snowflake, right? So market, right? So majority, so whomever is like with Microsoft kind of, right? Majority of the people go with Azure Databricks only because they are like used to with Microsoft kind of, right? So we know, right? Microsoft dominates majority of the places kind of, because from small company to big company, right? People are using Microsoft. People are using Microsoft only, even though AWS market is huge, right? Big companies only they will go with AWS kind of, right? So that's where, and also like as I said, for all the companies, right? There won't be like so huge kind of, right? Mainly their requirement will be processing. So such kind of companies and all using Databricks. But like banking or like medical companies or like these kind of Swiggy, all these people, right? Amazon, Netflix, such kind of people go with Snowflake because their requirement is of what? Huge. They are like coming with huge data, right? So that's where they will go with Snowflake.
Market carrying the data. Most of that.
But I can say like, see, not based, see, for both the things you will get job easily compared to like, other technologies, I can say. But choose based on like, the capacity. For example, Databricks is compared to Snowflake, bit tough, okay, bit complicated kind of Databricks. So based on your capacity, right? So finally our aim is like, you should be comfortable with the technology, right? Then only you can work aram se, right? We should not depend on somebody else, right? Once I learned the course means if I get the job, right? I should not depend on anybody else. Like that you should learn, right? So for example, 1-2 months, it's fine. But after that, I should not depend. So if you were like, enthusiasm is more, you are like, you are okay to set hours to practice, then go with the Databricks. Okay. But I'm not that much interested, right? And I need to get the job, my requirements, I need to get the job and I need to survive easily, then go with Snowflake. Okay. So survival rate will be easy in Snowflake compared to Databricks. Okay, so based on that you choose. Okay, so how, if you are more end to enough, right? If you can set more hours, then Databricks is the good option. Okay. So based on that you choose, and also you will get a lot of requirement, right? In